right, with the start of my first word, my time will begin. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining the first Constructive Speech and Debate podcast. This is a podcast for everything speech and debate in Texas. Our names are Ryan Stokes and Kenny Adcock, and we are excited to continue this journey with you. As we begin to work through the season, it is our goal to share some stories, introduce you to experts, and facilitate conversations that we hope will help you throughout your season. Today, we are excited to have John Nichols back with us on the show as we discuss our thoughts on judging paradigms. We hope to give you some background on judge belief systems and how to win their vote from invitationals all the way to the highest levels of competition. So, with that being said, Kenny, let's hop into the first one. What can you tell us about a lay judge?
So I think lay judges are one of the most beneficial judges to the debate space. They are a true testament of how persuasive we are. When you hear the word lay judge, this is the individual that I think our target audience is. We're trying to do a lot of education here. So this is your bus driver, your parent, your novice coach. We've seen these guys. Ultimately, they're the ones that are trying to protect your school from uncovered fees, right? They're doing you a service, they're doing you a favor, and we have all benefited from those because judging fees are one of the most nuisance fines that happen whenever we have large entries, and all three of us have had large teams. And so these guys are super beneficial to the space. One thing that I would encourage our listeners is that I would highly avoid jargon, right? We have a ton of, terminology that we covered in our earlier episode in debate at Debatemont High. I would highly encourage you that these kids are at the elementary level, right? Like they don't have, that uniqueness link, internal link, that argument-based structure that you probably are going to get with some of these other paradigms. So using trigger words like disadvantage, stock, topicality, those kinds of things aren't going to go as far with this kind of judge. I think the big thing is that doesn't mean don't use them. I just think you need to provide more analysis when using these terms and these debate jargony words, because I think there's merit to using them. But when you have these lay judges, like the word like uniqueness, when I first started, I had to ask Ryan, what in the world does that mean? I had to reach out to guys like John and Rory McKenzie and like friends in the debate space, because these terms I had to have a vocab lesson. And we try to do a good job in prepping these lay judges, but there is no better trial than trial by fire than just sitting through rounds after rounds after rounds. One thing that I would encourage coaches to evaluate is that if your student gets a lay judge, that at the end of the day, it is not their right to call that judge a bad judge. I think that's a big thing that us as friends and coaches have had to adhere to, because technically that person might have filled out a bad ballot for your team, and it may not have made sense to them because they spoke at such a high literacy level when it comes to CX. But at the end of the day, that judge is still as valid. That judge's opinion is still valid. And at the end of the day, if you didn't get the ballot, it's because you weren't persuasive and something happened on your end. And I would highly encourage coaches just to make sure that your students are evaluating that way. So you need to figure out how to have the debate while talking to someone who has little to no experience. And that's the big piece, right? That's what ultimately the ballot is going to come down to, is how well did you talk to a person about the policy on the AF that you want them to be voting on and the things that are going to come out of it? How is it going to impact them personally? How's that policy going to impact, and those words like the economy, the, advantages, what are they doing? Food shortages, the way the evidence works in the round. On the negative, again, I think you've got to do a ton of analysis for these kinds of judges, right? If you get heavy into the terminology and you just throw, three off arguments and, you run a counter plan and you would do all of this terminology that would be really good for somebody like me or Ryan or John or any of the other technical judges that you'll see on the circuit, it's not going to work as well. And so if you don't go into the on-case positions and really provide off-case evidence as to why their policy is bad, I think you're really setting yourself up for a harder round than you need to. And so ultimately, I think one of the best things that you can do with these lay judges is you can give them adequate instructions, right? Like we've all been on road trips where Google Maps failed us and we didn't end up where we wanted to. And so I think that's the position you have to take with these judges, is that at the end of the day, you've typed in the Google Maps directions. You've painted the picture. I want to get from the start of the round to the end of the round, and I want to make sure the judge arrives with me. And if a mistake happens, it's your error. You need to take ownership of that. And that's what I would encourage your team to do when you have judges like this, because this will be a true testament of skill, right? Your truly good caliber kids can adapt to these guys and come down off of that. We're doing pre-calculus, high level math, back to the, okay, I can still add 2 + 2, and I can still have a very simplified conversation about what I'm trying to do in this season or what I'm trying to avoid. So the AF and neg arguments need to avoid a lot of that language, a lot of the debate jargon. And if you do use them, heavy analysis, heavy points of persuasion, a lot of those speaking abilities, in inflection, when you get passionate, getting really loud and getting energized about things, all of those things are going to carry more weight in this round than they're not unique, there's no link, the internal link, like link defense, all of those terms that you're going to want to use when you get to the more technical side of paradigms. And then I think the last thing that I really, really want to preach on is that lay judges aren't bad judges. They're available judges. They're in the space. They're growing. And the only way we keep these guys and we take them to the next level of paradigm is by coaching them. And so the more ballots we can give them, the more ballots we can put in front of them, and the less time they can feel like they're the quote unquote dumbest person at the back of the room, because we've spent the last 8 months or however long in this season studying this topic and we're experts in economic policy, when in reality, we're a parent is doing a really, really kind gesture, or a bus driver who, just drove you an hour and a half to get your kids to the tournament is doing a really nice gesture to make sure your budget is safe and secure and you're not spending 125 to 175. I've seen it as high as $200 for fees. And so the education that comes with practice, just as your kids are going to want to get rounds and get round practices, is the best thing that you can do and you can coach through your kids, is how to perceive, how to engage, and how to ultimately teach lay judges how to participate in the rounds. So keep things simplified, keep things very, very analytical, though communication is going to be key for these kinds of judges. I think that's kind of my big spiel about lay judges. I love these guys. Coming from the IPA world, they were really, really beneficial and they helped me grow as a competitor. You guys have anything you want to add about them?
I was going to let John go ahead. So,
all right. Well, for me, I teach my kiddos that this is like the connect the dots style type of debate, paint pretty pictures, lead them, do the work for them. I liked your analogy of the map, more along the lines of, I tell my kids it's an opportunity to teach them about your case. They're not going to have any predispositions. You have no giant major hurdles to really truly overcome. These people that who are there are in essence, the debate being a game. These are those constituents, those are those people you're talking about that are going to be impacted by your DA or impacted by your case. So this is make that relatable to them in order to get the ballot.
Yeah, no, I agree. Small things, as someone who was a lay judge judging high school at, well, not super lay. I competed my senior year, but novice level at best by the time I graduated. Right. So lay judging in college, at high school tournaments, I would say that things that impress lay judges are good CX questions, right? They want to see that students ask good questions and interact with each other well. They also look for like some of the simpler on case style arguments from the negative. So run solvency. If you can explain to me why their plan doesn't actually achieve what they want it to, that's really easy for someone who's not accustomed to the debate space to follow. Or if you're going to run a DA, which you should run a DA in front of a lay judge, because you are just telling a story about how the plan causes a bad thing to happen, right? So don't feel like you're limited. You still have a lot of scope available to you. Even if you're a team that can explain why your counter plan is really good and would do a better job than the affirmative plan, that's still a valid argument that you can run on the negative side. That's all I have to add on. So after lay judges, we get into an East Texas bread and butter kind of judge. And this is your stock issues judges. So, John, tell us about stock issues.
Oh, I love stock issues judge. I'm a stock issues judge.
Everybody's favorite acronym.
Yes, and I know that y'all have covered stock issues in a previous episode. So if you get a stocks judge, this is where you just make sure every argument is outlined and related to whatever stock that you are dealing with in that particular moment. Roadmap it, label it, and make the judge's job flowing as easy as possible. So, and so as the affirmative, make sure, you start, several ways of writing affirmative cases, but you have your inherency, you have your harms, plan that solves those harms, and the solvency that proves it, you're good to go. And be really to answer a T. And then if you're the negative, I think I hear judges, not judges, but I have my kids will complain. Some of them worked for Kenny this summer who did not like the idea of stocks. They liked the other stuff. Apparently, stock issue is considered old and not fun. It's not the cool car, but so many options up there for stock. And if you can have stock for me is the foundation. If I can establish a solid foundation with stock issues on both AF and neg, then I can go and build up and have more fun and creativity with the other stuff that I think other judges are wanting to see in some places and what other students want to do. All right. My kids want to do something cool and outrageous. I'm like, I'm good with it. Give me the basic stocks. If you can't do that, then we need to readjust.
Okay. So, Kenny, if you're in the back of the room, would you call yourself a stocks judge or a policymaker?
Because I coach small school, I live in the stocks paradigm. In a perfect world, I probably am stocks with a policymaker evaluation tool, right? Because ultimately, I'm evaluating the policy and which one's going to be best. Is it the AF policy or the status quo? But because I have to coach stocks so heavy, and it's what is the East Texas way, and there's nothing wrong with that. I want our listeners to hear that very loudly. There's nothing wrong because actually, you call it the old car, John. I think stock issues are the Cadillac of debate. Right. I think it's the old, like it's the clean. Everybody knows it. It's good. It's structurally sound. It gets you really to point A to point B.
It's
and
a
it looks good.
classic.
Right. It's the classic mode of transportation.
Reliable.
And so a couple of things that I just want to add is for your upper level kids who are maybe can really explain the stocks to you. Right. Like, I mean, I've got a couple of those on my team. We have a traditional format for our casing. Right. So there are multiple ways you can write cases. You have the advantage method, you have the traditional stocks method. And so we have multiple formats of our casing because with these stock judges, John, you hit the nail on the head. Signposting is your best friend because they want to know they're the guys who are going to pull out, 17 sheets of legal paper and they're going to have the inherency arguments all float on one sheet. They're going to have the harms float on all one sheet. And they're going to want that structure, that organized. We just as you kind of heard us reference in the lay judge, they're almost the exact opposite. You want to use some of those heavy terminology pieces, right? The signposting is your friend. This is where I'm talking about inherency. This is the inherent card. This is the harms. These are the harms cards. And you'll find that you can use multiple case formats like that advantage format I just referenced. Just make sure that, as the debate gets through, these are clarified because all it takes is one. Because I think the stock issues judge votes on a checkbox system. Right? Did they have inherency? Check. Did they have topicality? Check. Did they have harms? Check. Did they have solvency? Check. And at the end of the day, if one of those boxes ain't checked, we have a good friend of ours out of Atlanta and Stuart Drake. That's an easy way to lose his ballot. Right? You didn't check the box. I voted for the other team because you weren't topical. You didn't have harms. You weren't solvent. Oh, your inherent barrier doesn't exist. That is a fast way to lose several people's ballot in the East Texas circle. And I think one of the big things that we really need to hit on is specifically on the small school rank, because I know we have a lot of those schools and a lot of our listeners are in that. And even at large school, UIO likes to hire a lot of these judges for the state tournament. And so it's well versed. It's something that you need to be able to debate too. And so I would highly encourage you to make sure you have these things signposted. You've practiced them in CX. You've done that because it's not something you'll be able to avoid, even if you're not on the East Texas circuit where a lot of these stock judges live and, put themselves. There's still a lot of people that, Miss Riggins pulls and she ultimately hires for the state tournament. So don't think because you're in Houston or you're in Dallas that, oh, I don't really have to deal with the stock judge because I'm not in East Texas. Jana will pull these guys for the state tournament, large school and small school.
And if I may, that being said, it's not uncommon for your coaches in those smaller schools to also be those judges because they're fulfilling some other requirement while they're at that tournament, whether it's a regional or state tournament, just at a different,
Yeah.
or even district.
Yep. So I think y'all covered the ins and outs of stocks. I don't really have anything to add there. What I do want to talk about, though, is our next paradigm that students should be aware of, and that's the policymaker, right? Policymaker is a great judging paradigm to have your kids in front of. Topicality still matters to these people, but it's not going to necessarily win you the round every time, right? If you can really prove that their plan isn't topical, they'll vote on it. But most of the time, they'll kind of wash topicality to the side because they want to hear how good is the policy. Like, is it a good policy that should be adopted, or is it a bad policy that should not be adopted? So they're going to look at things like offense, defense mindsets. Like, are the arguments that you're making in the round more offensive, or are they defensive in nature? Right. We're also going to look at the negative needing to run arguments with strong internal link, and impact arguments, right? If you, as the negative, are not doing your job of specifically showing how that policy is going to interact with the status quo in a negative way, you are not going to win a policymaker judge's ballot because there is no actual offense that you are putting onto the flow. Also, your counter plan, you need to understand your counter plan theory because policymakers will listen to theory arguments about how debate should be interpreted. Things like fiat, do counter plans have to be topical or not topical? Okay, they're going to want to listen to that, and they're going to want to see that you understand those arguments in the round, so that when we get to the end, which is the most important part of the round for a policymaker, they're going to look to the impact calculus. Can you explain on the aft and the next side of the debate why your advantages for the affirmative outweigh the disadvantages, whether that's because the disadvantages were turned as positives for your case or were delinked out of so that the affirmative advantages just outweigh in the world on time frame, magnitude, and probability? Or did the negative do a really good job and shows through their link work that they are like the ultimate outcome of adopting this policy is going to be catastrophic for the status quo?
Ryan,
Policymakers, yeah.
one thing that I think is really important for you to highlight there, because we've seen it in rounds. I know that we've talked about it in tab rooms. Would you mind highlighting the difference between impact calculus and impact weighing?
Oh, yeah. So impact calculus at the end of the round, or by my understanding, is going to be that I'm going to basically calculate out each argument to see who has the most arguments winning at the end of the round and also how they weigh. Okay. Where if I'm just doing an impact weighing, I might look at it like this. Okay. If I'm trying to solve wealth inequality, okay, the probability of wealth inequality being a thing right now in the status quo is 100%. Okay, the time frame is now. Wealth inequality is happening, right? The magnitude is massive. So if I can solve for that, and I'm hitting all three of those ways that we weigh impacts as the affirmative, that's a really big weight in the round. Now, if the negative on the other side comes up and they're running that, well, you're actually going to cause extinction in some way. Okay, extinction is normally, they claim it is right now. They claim that it is the highest magnitude because who cares about wealth inequality if we're all dead? And if they can prove the probability, they're going to outweigh on that argument, right? Which, when that comes into perspective at the end of the round in an impact calculus, right? Do I have another offsetting argument on the affirmative that meets that extinction argument so that we can compare AF and neg worlds completely through an impact calculus? I know that's a little muddled, but do you
Well,
have anything to add in that area?
the big thing that I want to make sure we add is that an impact calculus has those three puzzle pieces that you talked about, right? Probability, how likely is the impact to happen? Time frame, how long will it take the impact to happen? And then magnitude, how big will it happen? So because nothing is more frustrating for a policymaker judge for a student to get up and say, I'm going to run this impact calc. It's more like I have nuke war, they have econ collapse, I win. That's not an effective impact calculation. Make sure you're having your students, do some math. I know we're debate coaches, but do a little bit of math on, how likely, how big, and how long will it take for that impact to happen.
A
Yeah.
plus B will give you C.
We truly are cross curricular here, folks.
And the truth is, most of your stock issue judges, if the stocks are all covered, are going to default back to some of these same ideas of a policymaker where they're going to look at the impacts of the case, right? So you met all your stocks, you upheld your advantages. Do they outweigh whatever the negative tried to do? And that's how a stock issue judge will also sometimes make their ballot, right? So they're not policy completely, but they kind of have a policy mindset towards the end of the round. So it's important that your kids understand impact calculus and CX. John, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, policymaker, the big focus is off case argumentation. I'm wanting to see, or they're wanting to see what separates you from the other side. And what world do I want to live in? The happier world or the sad, or avoid living in the sad world?
Yep. All right. So we've covered lay, we've covered stock issues, we've kind of talked about our thoughts on policymaker, and now let's talk about the other one that you're going to see on your panel at state, right? Because the way they panel state rounds on day 2 is you're going to have a stock, you're going to have a policymaker, and then you're going to have this last one, tabula rasa. Now this or a tab judge. Okay. Now tab judges claim to be a blank state, right? A blank slate in the round. But this can be somewhat misleading for our new debaters, okay? You need to provide framing and theory backing for why the judge should view the round and arguments in a certain way. Because if they're a blank slate, a true tab judge, they have nothing. They just want you to come in and tell them why they should vote whichever way in the round. So you're going to need to frame that round towards your traditional style. So whether you're more of a policy team or a stocks team, you need to tell the tab judge based on their paradigm why they should view the round through a format that you are more comfortable debating in. Okay, if you don't, they will usually fall back to an offense defensive mindset like a policymaker. They typically don't enjoy stock issue debate or topicality at all. Just avoid running them. Because unless you can establish the framing that they shouldn't be a tab judge, they should be a stock judge, your on case argumentation from the neg side is going to fall super flat. Okay. If you are the affirmative, you need to make sure to extend and warrant out your solvency to prove your impacts in the round, because tab judges do, like as I said, default back to an offense defense mindset. Do not just tag extend things. Make sure that you are explaining the warrants throughout the round. A negative team will have no problem running critiques, counterplans, or disadvantages as long as they explain them well. If you're going to run a critique in front of a tab judge, you should probably know the literature that you're talking about, and not just being one that you pulled off open evidence. Because a good tab judge has probably been listening to Ks. They did Ks in college. They might be leaning progressive if they are on the younger side age-wise as a tab judge. Okay, so be aware that if you're running critiques, you need to know the philosophy that you are advocating for. Negatives should also go after solvency on case, and an impact calculus through your framing is important to these judges. So adjust your voters to fit the framing in the round. Okay, for example, if an affirmative team is advocating that we have to view systemic inequality impacts before existential impacts, the negative either needs to adjust to their framework in a tab judged round, or provide a counter framework to access the larger impacts on their DAs and counter plans. Y'all have anything to add, guys?
I guess the one thing I would add, I mean, great analysis on why you're wanting to how to handle a tab judge. I guess a little background is that the mindset of what a tab judge is, or at least in the mind, what they're thinking, is that since they're a blank slate, they're not supposed to, they're not bringing any preconceptions into the round, or they're not supposed to be. And the idea that pretty much anything and everything goes, like you said, as long as you're able to warrant, explain, and detail everything out for them. I guess when I tell my kids, when you hear tab judge, that's a caution flag. Um, don't be afraid to my experience would be not to be afraid to ask them, what kind of tab judge are you? I.e., is your focus on, like, you're just because you're a tab judge doesn't mean you're truly agreeing with the mindset of what an actual critique is. You'll listen to one, but not necessarily vote on one. And you
Mm-hmm.
can get an idea of how much work you would have to do with this particular judge pushing that boulder uphill or downhill, so to speak. So I tell them, like, hey, I'll listen to any argument you weigh it out for me. I'm not a huge fan of critique. You'll have to work really hard. It's not saying I won't listen to it and I won't vote on it, but odds are you're going to have to work really hard to establish it. Probably more time than you're going to want to put into it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think there are a couple of really cool philosophies behind the tab judge. There was a movement this summer that, judge implicit bias was a big thing, right? Like, people have written in their paradigms that if you do this at all in the round, I will immediately vote you down, but claim to be tab judge. Right. Like, so some of those things that they're standing for and they're advocating for are good things. Like, don't be racist in the round, right? Like, don't be, sexist, right? Like, don't be a womanizer in the round. Like, some of those things are really empowering things, but I struggle with the ballot as the mechanism for some of those things. I So there's a fine line between what is a tab judge and what isn't. So one of the things that I do personally with my team is, if you have somebody who claims to be a tab judge, default to your state paradigm prep. And what I mean when I say that is, like, as a small school coach, 99% of the judges that my kids are going to see are stock issues. And so if we hear the words tab, we're almost always going to attempt to kick back to stocks, because that's the judge's ballot we have to practice the most to win. And so that would be an encouragement that I would, encourage coaches and students to kind of work through, right? Like, what is your primary ballot that you're going to be advocating for? Because that's what you want to practice, because these guys are technical, right? They're very tech over truth kind of judges, and they want that signposting. They want that terminology because they're seasoned coaches, they're recent graduates. These are a lot of people who have a ton of debate experience. I know good friends of ours that call themselves tabs judges, and I believe them. I believe that they're effective in removing those biases and listening to what's in the round, and then closing the door, evaluating, filling out the ballot, and then opening the door, and then their own political beliefs, their opinions, that they carry them out. That's the issue with tab, is that we inherently have biases that are built into us, and sometimes they interfere with the way we evaluate the round or we evaluate an argument. And so that's one of the big hurdles that I would encourage kids to be aware of. If you get somebody who says that they're tab, realize that you may accidentally run an argument that offends them, right? You might do something that is against their political leaning, and it might cost you the ballot, and that's okay, because there was no way to prep for that. And so tab judges are hard. They're really, really hard. So that's my 50 cents on that.
What you were saying, Kenny, ties into one last judge I want to kind of talk about briefly, before we talk about where to go find all these like paradigms that we've been talking about online. Okay. And that's the progressive style judge that is kind of making its way into the tournament space. And there's nothing wrong with these judges. They're like, all judges are great to have in a debate round. Most of these progressive style judges, and that's a self-coined term, like it's not an official judging paradigm that's out there yet, are usually your college kids that are competing at the highest levels, that are coming back and judging high school debate rounds because they want to give back to the community. And I love that about them. Okay. But they do have, most of the time, these progressive tab judges have a social justice issue that they really care about, and they've spent a lot of time reading literature on and running at the college level, right? And they have such a deep background in it, and they believe that debate is a great space to move for, whether it's in round or out of round, to move on these social justice issues. That you should be aware that if you have a tab judge, to ask that question: what kind of tab judge are you? Are you more of a progressive style tab judge? Are you more of a, like, want you to just run the round however you're going to run it kind of tab judge? And if you hear that key word of like progressive, just know that they're really going to love K work, and they will happily listen to critical affirmatives. They will happily listen to well-run strat critique arguments. And if you get one of those judges, especially if you're competing at the national level and like the TOC, you need to be ready to adapt and have a case that you can run in front of a judge of that style. And that's all I really have to say on that. So, Kenny, John, we know that at state, because we've all competed there on day 2 for CX, that you are likely to get a stock, a policy, and a tab judge in the back of the room as your panel. Kenny, how do you approach a mix of that judging style on a panel?
Well, I think we're looking at UIL State specifically. The paradigm booklet is your friend. As a coach, it is your responsibility to know that paradigm booklet, know who's in that booklet. A lot of the tab room paradigms that you'll see posted for them are pretty accurate as well. You're looking for those trigger words, right? Do they want signposting? Do they want? And so you're kind of trying to figure out, if somebody says tab, where do they lean? What direction? Are they more progressive? Are they more policymaker? Are they more stock? And so you can kind of adapt that way. And then from there, your stock issue judges, you're running the checkbox. For your policymaker, you're still advocating for the policy. You have a little bit more access to terminology. And so we're really digging into that paradigm booklet, making sure we know who it is. And if we don't, we're making some friends and asking, our friends hey, do you know who this is? Can you help us do a little bit of prep here? And then we send the kids off to the round. And sometimes it's really just luck of the draw.
John, how did you coach your kids to approach a mixed panel?
So I tell them, you always have to be able to sit down and look at your judge and evaluate while you're following, as you're presenting and they're following along. If I know that I have at least a stock judge, a tab judge, and a policymaker, I'm going to tell my kiddos, okay, we're going to aim for 2 out of 3 because that's all you need to win the round.
Mm-hmm.
You might not be able to win the tab judge, and in the effort of getting the tab judge, you might do things that are going to go against stock or policy. I usually tell them to go for the stock and the policymaker because they can actually, like you said earlier, default and blend into each other a little bit. So if I have a stock judge in my affirmatives and my kids are nailing all that part, then it's going to come down to the offensive side, the advantages versus the DAs. And that's where the big focus for the policymaker is going to be is off case. And usually when we put our affirmatives together, and I'm sure y'all have experienced it, 1 or 2 of our affirmatives, the case side's usually pretty strong, and it comes to either T, which I don't know why y'all feel that's a big deal on my side of things, or DAs and counter plans.
Can't be because
it comes down to the off case. Say what now?
It can't be because you chase beavers.
Hey, beavers save lives.
Oh man. Okay, so for me personally, my last bit of advice, and then I kind of want to tell y'all where you can go get your where you can go get access to these paradigms, is it depends on what side of the ballot we're on. If we're AF, I'm really going to push for the stock judge because I know how I can win their ballot, right? If I cover all my stocks, I'm going to win the stocks judge. And then I'm going to frame out my impacts on the affirmative side to try to best show the policymaker why I'm good, and that could possibly pick up the tab judge. Okay. On the negative side, this is going to sound bad, but if I can win a single on-case argument, I'm going to win the stocks judge. So I might go more progressive on the negative side than I ever would the affirmative, because I can showing some aggressive neg strat arguments such as K's, where the stock judge might not listen to it, the policy judge and the tab judge are definitely going to listen to it. And if I've got a team that on the affirmative side that I know is more stock debating and how they're used to debating, I'm hoping that I can catch those two on the negative side, right? So it depends on what side of the ballot I'm personally on when I'm at state, how I kind of tell my kids to go for the room. Okay. Kenny, tell us where you can find UIL paradigms like at state, and then we can find paradigms on Tabroom.
So UIL State will post the paradigm booklet typically a week to 2 weeks. If we're real lucky, 3 weeks before. UIL doesn't have a great comprehensive list until that UIL State tournament, which is why I would use tabroom.com. And I'll link the judge paradigm to this episode so you can kind of go see it and start playing. You can search mine, you can search Ryan's, and you can search John's. All of us kind of have ours written differently, and there's some insight there, some different things that we evaluate. But that'll give you an idea as to what you're looking for, some of those trigger words. And so Tabroom, Judge Paradigms, like I said, I'll link that to the episode so some of our listeners will be able to catch that on our YouTube channel. So double back if you're on Spotify to catch that. And so that's where I go. That's where I evaluate. And, one of these days we may have to cover how to evaluate paradigms, and you'll see that on the Tabroom side and actually share the screen and do that.
Well, there's the timer. Thanks again for joining us for the first Constructive Speech and Debate podcast. John, thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And to everyone listening, if you feel like you are better equipped to handle judges in the back of the room after this episode, give us a like, share it out, help other people get involved with the podcast and get them listening, because if you think it's a good source, we believe you. Thanks.
That's what we're here
We'll
for.
see you next week. Bye.